Now, I need to get to this. This is just probably the most pathetic moment so far in the entire Republican primary race. I mentioned that Chris Christie has now endorsed Donald Trump for president, even after time, just instituting brutal attack after brutal attack. This is probably the most humiliating moment I've ever seen of Chris Christie or of any major politician. He showed up at a Trump rally to introduce Trump as the next president of the United States. And then Trump, thinking he's off mic, walks over to Chris Christie and basically pats him and says, "Chris, go home. The plane's over there." And Christie just looks completely reduced. I mean, he just looks so small and pathetic after this. And then Trump starts speaking. I've got the audio here because the mic captured it. Maybe the most pathetic and humiliating moment of the campaign so far. Take a look.
So do I, and that's why I'm proud to introduce to you the next president of the United States, Donald Trump.
Here comes Trump, and listen carefully now. Listen very carefully. Get in the plane and go home. It's over there. Go home. This is too good, Lewis. This is in the top 3 pathetic moments for me during the campaign so far. The other 2 very quickly. Jeb Bush getting kicked off stage at a Rotary Club event so that they could go back to dealing with new business within the Rotary Club. Thinks about shaking people's hands. Nobody wants to shake his hands, so he goes back over to his seat and starts spooning goop into his tea. Take a look at this.
Thank you. You're kicking me out the door. You're kicking me out the door.
Governor, thank you very much for joining us today. I believe your schedule has a hard stop.
Yeah.
There are more than 1 million
Handshaking?
Rotarians around this globe.
Nobody wants handshaking.
And we all share
I'll go over
4
here.
tests that
I will
guide
sit
our daily
back down,
interaction
look
with
around
each other,
awkwardly,
with our friends, with our coworkers.
sit, and then I'm going
This
right for the
club has added a
gloop. Here it is.
fifth
Here's
test.
my
Before you
spoon.
run, I would invite all
And
you
let
to
me
join
just start
us.
spooning this
I will
stuff
gavel
right
the
in.
meeting
Somebody saying
closed
maybe it's honey for his
afterwards.
tea.
Ask-
Okay, and then the third contender for most pathetic moment so far is when Jeb Bush asked people to clap. I mean, there's not much better than that. Take a look.
So here's my pledge to you. I will be a commander-in-chief that will have the back of the military. I won't trash talk. I won't be a divider-in-chief or an agitator-in-chief. I won't be out there blowharding, talking a big game without backing it up. I think the next president needs to be a lot quieter, but send a signal that
he'll
we're
be quiet,
prepared
all right.
to act in the national security interests of this country, to get back in the business of creating a more peaceful world. Please clap.
Lewis, I go to you. Which of these 3 moments is the most pathetic and humiliating of the campaign?
Definitely getting as a presidential candidate getting kicked off stage at a Rotary Club meeting. I think is I can understand the clapping thing because like
People
we've
were
said before,
sleeping. I mean, you can't blame them. You can't clap if you're sleeping, right? I mean,
That's right. They're asleep. And I'm not 100%. Although it sounded really bad with Christie and Trump.
Yeah.
He could have just been saying, "Hey, buddy, no need for you to stick around anymore.
Yeah.
There's the plane. Go home, relax."
Yeah.
But
it was weird.
It was weird.
It was like it was his little dog, and he was saying, "We're done. Thanks for fetching. Now get over into your dog bed." Okay, so I'm on Twitter at @dpakman. Lewis is on Twitter at @LewisMotomedy. And any thoughts on this? Let us know on Twitter. I want to tell you a story about a full-grown man who thinks he could be president of the United States, who decided to throw an embarrassing and pathetic temper tantrum on Fox News. Ted Cruz went on Fox News. He thought the questions were too tough. The questions weren't fair, and he accused host Chris Wallace of working for the Trump campaign or reading Trump talking points. Chris Wallace smacked him down, and it did not go well at all for Ted Cruz. I have the video here. I have the audio. Let's take a look.
For you, and your campaign has been involved in a series of incidents that people are calling dirty tricks. I want to put up a list of them. In Iowa, the Cruz campaign sent out tweets saying Ben Carson was suspending his campaign. That was false. The campaign put out flyers accusing people of voting violations. That was false. In South Carolina, a Cruz super PAC attacked Trump over the Confederate flag, and your then communications director posted a link this week accusing Rubio of disrespecting the Bible. That was false. Question, Do you take personal responsibility? This was your campaign, except for the super PAC. Do you take personal responsibility for this series of incidents, and what does it say about the culture of the campaign you're running?
Chris, every accusation you raise there is incorrect. I appreciate your reading the Donald Trump attack file on that.
Oh, come on, sir.
Let me tell you, our campaign has been from the highest...
Wait a minute, sir.
Chris, let me answer. Please don't interrupt
personally
me.
apologized to Ben Carson on
Chris,
a debate
please don't interrupt
stage.
me.
You fired your communications director.
Chris,
don't
please
say
don't
this is an
interrupt me.
Oppo file on our part, sir.
Chris, please don't interrupt me. Our
Well,
campaign from the beginning.
please don't say that. Accuse me of something I didn't
go
do.
ahead, Chris. Let me know when I'm allowed to answer.
Well, don't accuse me of doing something I didn't do. Two of those things, you apologized for one, and you fired your communications director. Don't say this is the Oppo file.
Chris, our campaign from the beginning has been the highest level of integrity. When others have engaged in personal attacks and insults, we don't respond in kind. And, you know, it was striking. You just had Donald Trump on the air. You didn't ask him about the fact that he sent out a fabricated quote from Tom Coburn impugning my integrity. Tom Coburn, Senator Coburn, came out and said it was an utter fabrication, and yet Donald continued repeating what he knew.
Wow. The questions you asked me are more difficult than the questions you asked Trump. I love it how Cruz says, none of what you're saying is true. I mean, yes, I fired one of my staffers for one of the things you mentioned, and I personally apologize for the other. Neither of those things happened. How else could this possibly have gone?
Yeah, I love how he calls his campaign the pinnacle of integrity or something like that. I mean, talk about, I don't know, Dave, something about it just every time he speaks.
Yeah, it's cringeworthy.
It's very cringeworthy.
This is just basic journalism, right? Hey, here's stuff you said, comment on that. Mm-hmm. What on earth is controversial about that? It is absolutely unbelievable. Clarence Thomas has spoken, literally, quite famously. It's been about a decade since Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas spoke during oral arguments in the Supreme Court. And yesterday, suddenly, he spoke. Now, what topic was seemingly so important that it caused Clarence Thomas to break his 10-year vow of de facto silence? None other than guns. He asked many questions and completely changed the direction of the oral arguments in Voisin v. U.S., which is a case involving domestic violence and gun rights. The Supreme Court is currently considering a case which would make it easier for people convicted of misdemeanor domestic violence offenses to keep their gun rights. As you may know, although you may not, since 1996, if you're convicted of a misdemeanor domestic violence offense, you are banned for life from possessing a gun. Clarence Thomas stepped in and raised a broader constitutional question, which, as some are suggesting, maybe would have been raised by the late Antonin Scalia. Here's a quote from Mother Jones about how it went down. The oral arguments in the case appeared to be wrapping up early. Ilana Eisenstein, the Assistant Solicitor General, said to the justices, if there are no further questions, long before her time had run out. Then Clarence Thomas shocked the courtroom by asking her whether she could think of any other example where a misdemeanor criminal conviction could deprive an American citizen of a constitutional right for a lifetime, in this case, the right to own a firearm, which at least as of now is still a constitutional right. This continues to be explained in Mother Jones by going on and saying Thomas continued to press her, asking whether a misdemeanor conviction could deprive other people of other constitutional rights, perhaps under the First Amendment. Let's say that a publisher is reckless in the use of children and what could be considered indecent displays, he posited in a deep, booming voice rarely heard in the chamber. Let's say it's a misdemeanor. Could you suspend that publisher's right to ever publish again? Now, Lewis, it's so crazy that Clarence Thomas spoke during oral arguments that reporters started running into the courtroom. I mean, imagine the scene, 10 years without speaking, to the point where when you merely ask a couple of questions, the courtroom is all of a sudden filled with reporters.
It's shocking. Yeah, it's also quite interesting, as you pointed out, that as soon as there's no Scalia,
right,
Thomas talks. And I don't know what the dynamic was like in there. I don't really know much about that.
Right.
All I know is he's been silent.
And this actually has been sort of discussed by Clarence Thomas. He says from when he was a little kid, he always preferred to listen. And he says this dates back to when he was in school. He had a particular accent, which made his speech difficult for others to understand, and he sort of took to listening instead of talking. And of course, a number of followers of the Supreme Court are saying, there's this idea that Antonin Scalia's presence was the sort of more comfortable public speaking voice of Clarence Thomas, and maybe he didn't feel as much of a need to speak when Antonin Scalia was there. Very shortly after the passing of Antonin Scalia, Clarence Thomas is all of a sudden commenting, and it is very, very interesting, and we'll continue to follow it. But this is something that legal scholars have talked about for a very long time, a decade vow of silence in practice.
Yeah, and it's a strange practice. I feel that he should be part of discourse, but I guess it's his constitutional right to remain silent.
Well, the counter is he is a judge, and he can express his opinions in written form as part of the decision, and that's that. Of course, every once in a while, maybe people want to hear from the guy and see what he's thinking as these oral arguments are going on. Very, very interesting and just generally unusual situation. Let's talk a little bit about Ben Carson. In a last-ditch effort to remain even remotely relevant and pander to the low-information religious right voters that follow Pat Robertson, Republican presidential candidate Ben Carson is pledging to ban the, of course, non-existent ban on Christianity in public schools, which, of course, is just not a real thing. He showed up at Regent University and spoke to Pat Robertson, and he said, I will end the ban on Christianity in public schools. As you and I know, Louis, though, that ban doesn't exist. Take a look.
And, there are multiple quotes, if you look in our book, America the Beautiful, from our founders. I would begin to emphasize those once again. And if I were president, I would work very hard on eliminating the ban on Christianity in our public schools.
So when he said eliminating the ban on Christianity, I assume he just misspoke and he means the ban on Christianity, which of course doesn't exist. Students are allowed to pray in school, doesn't matter what their religion is, but you can't have government-sponsored or mandatory prayers. And of course, the government and thus public schools can't establish one religion over another. But Christianity is no more banned in public school than is the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster or Scientology or whatever. But who can control if a student is sitting there and silently praying? Nobody can control that. It hasn't been banned. And this is a trope that we hear time and again from the religious right, particularly the Christian right. Oh, Christianity has been banned. No, it hasn't. You just can't have designated religious time in a public school.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what is banned, at least in some places, is the forcing of religion down people's throats.
Right.
And so I think that is actually quite important. And maybe he's just talking about, I don't know, the Pledge of Allegiance or certain things like little things like that. I mean, how important is that really?
The real question, I have the important question, is when does Ben Carson's book tour end? Because the presidential campaign clearly ended a long time ago, in spite of Ben Carson maybe not noticing or at least admitting that. And this idea of painting Christians as some kind of victims in the U.S., it's a total fantasy. We need to dispel this notion that Christians are victims in the United States. I think Marco Rubio would certainly agree with my phraseology, if not the message there.
Yeah. Are you a victim if you don't get whatever you want? I don't think that's really a victim.
Ben Carson also said when talking to Pat Robertson that he's staying in the race in spite of being way behind in the polls because he's not doing this for himself. He's doing it for the nation.
Right.
How staying in this race helps the nation, I couldn't tell you. I mean, I looked all day. I couldn't figure it out.
Maybe the more people buying his book,
right,
the better off the nation is. Something like that, maybe.
Okay, we have results from Super Tuesday yesterday. All sorts of states voting on the Democratic side, on the Republican side. We will start on the Democratic side. The big question, of course, Louis, was, will Bernie Sanders be able to continue this chase of the Democratic presidential nomination, or does the math become difficult? As you can see, Hillary Clinton overwhelmingly destroying Bernie Sanders in Alabama, doing very well in Arkansas, losing to Sanders in Colorado, winning overwhelmingly in Georgia, barely eking out a victory here in Massachusetts. In Minnesota, Bernie Sanders did win, and quite handily. Also, Bernie Sanders winning in Oklahoma, Tennessee, and Texas. big wins for Hillary Clinton. Vermont, we do have the numbers reversed there. Bernie Sanders, 86%, Hillary Clinton, 14%. A huge victory for Bernie Sanders in his home state with very few delegates. That is important to remember. And then a big win, basically a 2-1 margin for Hillary Clinton in Virginia. So to sum up, Hillary Clinton winning 7 states yesterday, Bernie Sanders winning 4 states. The key thing to remember, Lewis, is we do have proportional allocation of delegates here. In Massachusetts, for example, Bernie Sanders with 49% of the vote, getting just barely half of the delegates. So let's consider that. What about delegates? How many delegates does each candidate have? Well, it really depends on who you ask and how you count them. Whether you count the superdelegates that are mostly Democratic Party officials, mostly who have said that they will ultimately support Hillary Clinton. Let's look at CNN's current count. And if you look at that, based on the 2,383 delegates needed to win, Hillary Clinton currently, by CNN's total, 1,055 delegates. That puts her at 44% of what she needs in order to secure the nomination. Bernie Sanders, 418 delegates, puts him at 18% of what he needs. Now, you might notice that those numbers don't really coincide with what has actually happened in the electoral vote alone, or rather in the popular vote alone in these early primary states. And that, of course, Lewis, is because of these party officials' superdelegate status who have mostly already said, hey, I'm voting for Hillary Clinton at the convention. Big controversy over this. Is it really democratic? Has it served its purpose, or has it actually backfired and created a way, as Debbie Wasserman Schultz, the Democratic National Committee chairwoman, has said, of preventing activists from running against establishment candidates? A lot of people increasingly displeased with this.
As they should be. What's more democratic than just going with the popular vote, right? I think if that is true democracy in its purest form there.
So let's talk about some of the upcoming contests over the next couple weeks. On March 5th, over the weekend, Kansas, Louisiana, and Nebraska will vote. About 125 or so delegates available there. March 6th, Maine will have 30 delegates at stake. On March 8th, Mississippi and Michigan with just under 200 delegates at stake. And then March 15th, a really big day, Florida, Illinois, Missouri, North Carolina, and Ohio. Any number of delegates, Lewis, hundreds and hundreds of delegates available there. Many of these start to become winner-take-all states. Now, there's sort of disagreement among some about whether these are going to be good states for Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders. Robert Reich, who has endorsed Bernie Sanders, says now we're getting to Bernie's states. Unfortunately, the polling data doesn't really seem to support that, although a lot of the polling data in these upcoming states is very, very old. I think we can say with certitude, Lewis, that in 2 weeks, we will either be able to say it's basically over for Bernie, or Bernie has a shot. I don't think it's realistic to say Bernie will be in the lead or the clear front runner after March 15th, but it will be more of a question of, is he still in, or is he all but out mathematically?
Yeah, he's got a shot. I think we're going to have instances of Nevada happening again. So I think Bernie...
Nevada, Lewis.
Nevada. Excuse me. I did it. I did the thing.
Yeah.
Anyway, yes, I expect Bernie to do quite well in some of these states.
All right, so we'll continue to follow that. We'll try to get newer polling data to you as it becomes available. Okay, yesterday was Super Tuesday. We went out. We talked to voters. We talked to voters at polling places. We talked to voters all over the place. We went to a Bernie Sanders, the official Bernie Sanders Boston area event, and I have a bunch of stuff to present to you. First, I spoke to a few Hillary voters. I'm going to play this video for you. The interesting thing here was I was told in a completely serious manner by a Hillary supporter that she supports Hillary because of, and I quote here, Billary, which is an unusual reason to support a candidate. But that being said, let's take a look. Here with a Massachusetts voter, did you vote on the Democratic ballot or Republican today?
Democrat.
And who did you vote for?
Hillary.
What made you decide to vote for Hillary Clinton instead of Bernie Sanders?
Billary.
Billary. Explain that.
Well, I think Bill Clinton's one of the best presidents we've ever had, and I think it's somehow he'll have an influence. So
in a way, by voting for Hillary Clinton, you feel as though it's a way maybe to get Bill Clinton to have more influence in the U.S.
I'm sure he will.
Any particular issue that you really agree with Hillary Clinton on?
A lot of them. I really couldn't pinpoint one right now.
One that's most important, maybe?
Not really.
Not really. Anything you disagree with about Bernie Sanders' platform?
No.
So really, Bill Clinton was an important thing for you.
Yes.
All right, thank you very much.
Definitely. All right, thank you.
You voted on the Democratic ballot today. Who ultimately received your vote today?
Hillary.
And what made you decide to vote for Hillary instead of Bernie Sanders?
I've been a Hillary supporter for a long time, since Bill, and I wanted her to, be the first female president, and I voted to her the previous election, but she never made it. Obama did instead, so this time again.
Is there any particular issue where you really agree with Hillary more than Bernie Sanders?
I think she's a little bit more knowledgeable in terms of defense and international affairs.
And are there any issues that are of particular concern where you don't feel Bernie Sanders is qualified?
I think Bernie, he has a lot of good ideas, but I don't know if they're realistic in terms of, becoming a reality.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Which ballot did you vote today, Democratic or Republican?
Democratic.
And who did you ultimately vote for?
Hillary Clinton.
Was there a long period of time that you thought about this, or was it clearly Hillary for you from the start?
Probably pretty clearly from the start.
Any particular issue where you said, Hillary Clinton, I agree with, Bernie Sanders, I don't?
Nothing particular. I think just more the electability of Hillary. Some of the Bernie's policies I agree with, but I don't feel like he could be effective implementing them. So nothing specific.
And in what sense do you feel Hillary is more electable than Bernie Sanders? Or why do you think that, I guess, is what I'm saying?
Why do I think she's more electable? I think she has a more moderate position. Still very progressive, but more moderate. I think Bernie will be cast as someone who's too far to the left for a general election.
So obviously that doesn't seem to be totally backed up in the polls. What was your thought, Louis? I mean, whenever we talk to Hillary voters, now we've spoken to them in New Hampshire and we've spoken to them in Massachusetts, there is this sense that it's not so much about issues, but it's about the idea of Hillary Clinton as the nominee.
Yeah, or the idea that Bernie Sanders cannot successfully implement his ideas.
Right.
And I say, who cares? Let Bernie try. Let him move the discussion in one direction. But I guess people don't agree with me.
I think that certainly the Massachusetts Hillary voters we spoke to, not to generalize because we spoke to a handful of each, they seem to have slightly more rational ideas about voting for Hillary versus Bernie than those with whom we spoke in New Hampshire, although we've spoke to a very small samples.
Exactly. Yeah. I don't know if we spoke to enough people to actually determine anything, but still some of the same ideas throughout.
Okay, the next question I had for Bernie voters at the official Boston Bernie Sanders campaign watch party was, what do you think about Hillary Clinton? And really try to figure out, is it that you like Bernie a lot more, or is it that you have an active dislike for Hillary Clinton? Let's see what people said. If ultimately Bernie Sanders is not the nominee, what are your feelings about Hillary Clinton as the potential Democratic candidate?
I think Hillary Clinton absolutely has her flaws. I am ecstatic at the idea of a female president finally in the United States. I definitely think that she is the lesser of 2 or 3 or 4 evils compared to a lot of the Republican candidates.
I don't like Hillary Clinton. I don't think she's trustworthy. I just don't think she's real or authentic in any way.
For me, at first, before Bernie Sanders was in this race, Hillary Clinton was my choice. But for me, Hillary Clinton has had ties too close to Wall Street. Her vote in Iraq was a very big blemish on her career, as well as not saying anything to do with the Trans-Pacific the TPP, the trade deal, up until it was politically viable for her to be opposed to it.
I used to be a big supporter of Hillary, and then I did my research, and I don't feel like she's to be trusted.
There's just so much about her that just really irks me. From her constant flip-flopping to a massive support for Wall Street, corporate America. She was for the TPP. Now she's saying she's against the TPP because she's running. She was a moderate in 2008. She got beat by Barack Obama, and now she's a progressive because Bernie Sanders is doing great as a progressive.
I'm hesitant, but I'm willing to support that, and hopefully some of the similar ideas that she has can still be brought to the White House and still perform well.
The thing with Hillary is that she's much more of your typical politician.
So it was really a mix, right, Lewis? I mean, we talked to people who really seemed to have an active dislike for Hillary Clinton. Then we talked to people who said, yeah, Bernie Sanders is more progressive in my estimation, but Hillary Clinton is not a bad person, and she's a good alternative if it's not Bernie.
But the theme of Hillary being untrustworthy and kind of
Wall
fake, yes, that too is that was very popular among the Bernie watchers. So I guess that's not really surprising. That's the best criticism there is, in my opinion.